I thought I'd ask first for Mike to respond to Silvia with some questions and perhaps Silvia to respond, but then pretty soon we're going to open it up to to the folks here.
Thanks. Right. It was like every time I came up with a question, you would answer it the next slide. So
the same thing happened for me.
A couple of comments. One was you mentioned the importance of TAs. We actually use undergraduate TAs because we don't have a graduate program, and it's been amazing. A lot of those characteristics that you noted are actually magnified in some ways by an undergraduate TA, as long as they're good and you know, you have to like, we do like weekly training sessions and that kind of thing. But we did a survey in our program of why students became majors, why they became anthropology majors. And we expected, one of the questions was there a particular professor or anybody who inspired you? And we thought it would be like a race to see which professor was the most inspiring. The TA is actually one. They, and the winner actually was Kenzie, who you already saw. She's the reason why we have more majors now. So that was interesting. Then, especially down the stretch, you started to anticipate my questions. I had recently seen a study about neurogenesis in rats and with exercise, and I didn't know if that also related to humans, and apparently
Yes.
it does. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then the other one I wondered was the effect of social isolation or strong social ties. Like in our world, you know, we talk about social capital. Does that correlate with?
Yes. So social isolation in animal research is shown to be to negatively affect the memory system, hippocampus, as well as the prefrontal system, important for learning, planning, all of it. Yeah, and I mean, I think that one of the most important ways in which social bonding helps is by reducing stress, improving resilience, but also, yeah, the novel experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I was thinking about how you get students to focus away from grades.
Yeah.
And so the way that I've done it is just simply to say, come talk to me about ideas.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about grades. I do not want to hear anything about that. You've got the syllabus, it tells you about the grade structure. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to think about how to allow them to fail along the way and allow them to show progress. And I don't know the best way to do that. And I wonder.
Right. So the answer is different depending on the size of class. Does anybody teach, like I teach some small classes where this is really easy. So like with 12 students and under, does anybody have that situation? A few, okay. And then 35 or so is maybe more common. And the approach is different in each one. With the 12 student class, we have this really big project in mind, and this year we're building that video game that I showed. And we look at a lot of final products that we think are inspiring. So this year, if you're familiar with new games like Gone Home, some maybe not. So there's some new types of games out there. We basically played those games, and then we sort of cataloged the good features of those games, and that became our rubric. And then we just go out week after week and try to get better at doing the things that need to get done to make that game. And week after week, most of class is in a way spent, you might call it assessment, but really it's just feedback, giving each other feedback. And the whole spirit of the thing is like, we're gonna get here. We're gonna go to this space. That growth mindset is just built right into it. There's never a sense of grades, because I've never said anything about grades. I don't even mention it. It's just not even present. I will say, I've been carrying this around. These are actually my grades to the students. It's 12 pages, single-spaced, of evaluation of them. I'll read just a bit of David's here maybe for you, just to give you a sense of what this looks like. This is just a small part of David's. It has been absolutely delightful and inspiring to watch you dig deep and work with such dedication on developing the skills to create games. And by the way, praising effort, not, this is all like strategic in many ways. If you asked me to list your virtues 6 months ago, dedication would not have been one of them. The lunch we shared last year is something I'll always remember and cherish. Prior to that lunch, my impression of you is that you were very smart and that you thought you were too good for my classes. I went into that lunch thinking that you would probably convince me of this, and that I would need to rethink how I teach. Instead, I discovered passions within you I didn't know existed. I found somebody who could, would, and has thrown themselves into meaningful creative projects that unfortunately are not especially valued by school and might be labeled as nerdy or geeky by society at large. I found someone who has been mishandled, mistreated, and underappreciated by an education system focused on frustratingly narrow pursuits. In other words, I found a hero ready for adventure, a hero pushed to the margins of society, who by virtue of having been pushed there, sees things others cannot see. If he finds the strength to look honestly at himself and the world, he will find the insight to heal himself and others and set forth into the world to share a new message of hope and redemption. So kind of put into his language, he loves heroes. And so all of these are kind of like that. And I read these on the last day of class and mostly cried through the whole thing. And that's what grading looks like. What was beautiful about that was that the whole semester I found myself, while of course we're evaluating the work that students are doing week by week, as people I found myself cherishing their strengths and often finding that their weaknesses were transformed into strengths in certain situations. Like, you know, we're all different, and you start to see how these differences matter. So that was really great. In a larger class, I should address that. What I tried this semester, and I'm not yet sure how well it worked. I'm still waiting to hear back from students and so on, but I did the not yet grading. It was a lot of work. I had 6 big assignments, and basically students would turn them in, and they would just get a not yet if they didn't, get there. And it was either not yet or you got it. And so I had to regrade a lot of things, which is a lot of time, and maybe too much time. Like I have to reassess it just for that purpose alone. But certainly by the end of the semester, I was very pleased with how far the students had come. And instead of marking a bunch of C's and D's in the grade book, which were disappointments, and instead I gave a lot of A's, but they worked really hard for those. And so that was really rewarding in that sense.
That's my approach as well, of having this mastery goal that I don't care if I give, the majority of students an A at the end, Unfortunately, my university says I have to have a normal grade distribution, and so they're on my case about this, but I don't plan to budge.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah. Other questions in the audience?
Hi, thanks so much for both your presentations. I feel like, so I teach the honors chemistry labs here at BC, and I'm in a unique position of I have these students for 3 semesters consecutively. I'm with them. I do have an outstanding teaching assistant, but I'm on board with everything you've said. But the students I have come in, they're very motivated. They've already had chemistry. And they and their families and their grandparents are looking for medical school. And you can't change, we even have presentations on our campus that say, look, it's a 3.64 average. And all my students, I'm spending, everything you've said is right on board with, I don't talk about grades, I'm with them. They very much appreciate what I'm trying to do, but that looming, hanging over their head dark cloud, if I don't cut it. I have scholars who are thinking, should I change my major because I got a B+? When is a B+ a bad grade? And let's not talk about grades, but when you are faced with trying to teach in a way that is conducive to learning and really focusing on the individual's growth, how do we face this reality of here's what you want to do, but there's a gate?
Yeah.
Can you both comment on that?
Yeah,
Thanks.
so the way that I do it is I say, I'm going to expect a lot of you this semester. We are going to learn a lot of material, but if you do it, you will get an A. Most of you are going to get an A if you stick with this. And so then it's off the table.
Yeah, I mean, so we're all within that structure, and then we bend it where we can, and so on. And one thing that I don't really buy into is that it takes everybody 17 weeks to get an A. And so I give a lot of, like those medical students come in and they're griping about the B, I just say, okay, incomplete, and here's what you need to do to get up to an A by next semester. So.
In the back. You at the very back.
And I think a lot of us can appreciate sort of the movement towards wonder, but do you go and directly tell your students that you want them to get to wonder, or do you just guide them there?
I've done both, and depends on, I think it's very subtle, like how you frame it, because talking about learning to students can be very, very useful, but it can also feel like a distraction. It can also feel like you're putting them down. Like if you say, look, you guys are all like answer people, and you should be at wonder. Like it can that can feel bad. So I've done it both ways, and I've settled now on I don't show them the diagram anymore, unless sometimes like in a conversation like at lunch or in my office, I'll show it to them like if it comes up in the right way. But I do show them, I show this video, and it's a 2-minute video of these people playing in the snow in Wellington, New Zealand. And I show that, and I just kind of an inspirational piece in which I cover the big aspects of wonder. I say a lot of the same things that those studies say about what that state is like. And I just try to like put that out there as something that's a worthy goal, a worthy way to like be in the world.
What do you think about effort-based grading? The idea being, for example, students get 100% for decent effort, 50% for indecent effort, and 0% for no effort, and you just grade all the assignments like that. And then you just have the responsibility of making sure that the assignments are good, so if they do their effort, then they should learn something.
What do you think?
That's what I'm striving for. Haven't gotten there yet.
I think it's so, I mean, you're raising such an interesting issue, and for me, like I've wrestled with that a lot, and I guess like what I really liked about this semester, in which I didn't have any grades to worry about, like there was never 100 or 50 or any sort of number to put on anything. I guess there's two answers to that. One is like that was refreshing to not have to worry about the numbers. But on the other hand, I know a lot of students worked a lot harder than others to get the same grade, right? To get past the not yet. So I don't know. There's no easy answer to that. In the course of a curriculum, like many of you guys might know, like that's where I'm at. I teach at the beginning of our anthropology curriculum. Regardless of effort, I have a responsibility to get them to a certain place so they can go on to the next class and be successful. So that's where the effort thing is maybe not everything we need. So it's tricky.
Thank you. I teach at the Department of Economics, and a lot of people think economics is not that interesting, even boring. I beg to disagree. And I'm also a product of Boston College. I got my PhD here, so I have the honor to teach here. So I really enjoyed my education here as a student, and a lot of things that both of you mentioned applied to me as a student. And once I crossed the line, I was wondering if I was going to enjoy being on the other side as a teacher as much as I enjoyed learning. And quickly for myself, I discovered that actually the line is pretty blurred. I find myself constantly learning. So everything that you described actually applies to me. And I've been teaching 20 years. I constantly learn, and I believe that the wonder, the motivation are contagious. If I'm not really enthusiastic and if I don't see the wonder, it's very difficult for me to communicate that with the class. So I'm wondering, how much does it apply to you? How much of your learning in excellence is the source of your teaching in excellence?
No, you go.
So for me, it's it's like all of it. Most of the things that I teach, especially in my big lecture class, I learned yesterday. You know, like I learned like the day before, because that's what I'm excited about. And I think being excited about it makes all the difference. And I analyze like how I learn, and when I'm sort of in a peak learning mode, I like try to figure out like why am I learning so well right now? And when I'm not learning so well, I try to analyze like what's keeping me from learning right now. And I think those things are really a nice gateway to understanding how other people learn as well, like in a very deep sense, especially within your discipline, because each discipline has its own sort of things it has to wrestle with. And if you're not wrestling with them, then you're not going to be a very good teacher of those things.
I never teach the same class the same way twice. I would get too bored with that. And so I'm constantly updating with the new material, so constantly learning, trying to find a way to make the material more relevant to real world. So I teach a course on the developing brain, and a whole third of the course is devoted to why knowing about the development of the brain is important for law, education, public health, medicine. And so I'm constantly having to go way outside my area of expertise. Yeah, and I'm also constantly trying to take what I'm learning about the science of learning to try to push people towards this mastery, motivation, et cetera.
I'm very interested in your talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. I think all of us here understand, the data are very clear, how much better it is for the students to be intrinsically motivated. My question is, how really do we do that? And in fact, is it possible? First of all, is there something fundamentally inconsistent with saying you're going to teach someone to be intrinsically motivated? Secondly, obviously you can remove extrinsic rewards, but I guess my real question is this. How much can you do in a classroom? How much is the sensitivity to extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards a trait that students bring after a lifetime of growth into the classroom that is pretty much immune to it change during the course of 3 months? And what can you do to do that?
That's the question, right? Yeah, I mean, just looking at everything that Mike's talked about his own teaching practice, is phenomenal. It's hard for me to see exactly how I'm going to translate it to my large classes. I'm going to be teaching 150 students, this next semester, and I don't exactly know how I'm going to instill curiosity and wonder in each of them. I think for me, it's about making sure that they all find a final project that they are really lit up about, and finding ways for them to integrate the material over the course of the semester in the service of their final project that's very much individuated. But.
And for me, I think you're exactly right, and you nailed the paradox right at the beginning, saying that how do you teach this, motivation. So really, I mean, I think one of the things that happens when you just simply mention intrinsic versus extrinsic is you're putting it out on students. Once they see the data, then they can take that and they start working on it themselves. You can magnify that by having them journal on that topic in particular, for example. I have my students keep a journal, and I have them turn it in now and then just so I can see what's happening. And I took that idea from Paul Baker taught this class, Integration of Abilities, which is fantastic. It's profiled in the beginning of What the Best College Students Do by Ken Bain, if you've seen that book. And basically, he has students do really bizarre things. Like, for example, they go out and they meet somebody and they get to know them really well, and then they have to come back to class and they have to clap the rhythm of that person. Like people have a rhythm, It's totally bizarre, right? And so these students come in and they have to do this awkward clap. But then he has them journal about what was the creative process that led you to come up with that clap. And they have to think about how they think. And then he says, look, nobody in the world has ever thought the same way that you think. Nobody has the same experiences as you. Where does that come from? And it creates this reflective practice. And I think it's that reflective practice that's ultimately going to lead to that sense of passion and sort of joy in learning, intrinsic motivation, and so on.
Thank you both for terrific talks. I do research on motivation, and I totally buy into the idea of having a kind of growth mindset and having mastery goals. But the research is very mixed on this, and it does suggest that in some cases performance goals actually do lead to better outcomes than than mastery goals or certain kinds of performance goals per se.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how do you think about this? What do you think?
Yeah,
Is there a way to
so
balance?
if you have a lot of material to memorize that's just necessary, for example, in a chemistry class, then sometimes you have to give an extrinsic reward, you know, a contest or some sort of thing. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. But for more higher level thinking, it's really, really critical to have the intrinsic motivation. I don't know if that squares with your understanding of the literature, but.
And I've also been interested in that lately, and I guess in practice, like I see the two merging together so tightly that it's hard to pull them apart. You know, like when I'm actually teaching, I haven't set up a controlled experiment, which there's only extrinsic or only intrinsic. It's just a mix. And I mean, one of the things that inspires me is actually my colleague at Kansas State who teaches completely different from me, like the opposite. And he could come in here and get you guys all excited about how you should teach in this completely opposite way of what I just said, because he's amazing at what he does. Like, it suits him and his personality, and his style is to like have these extraordinary high standards, and you either get there or you don't, and he'll fail you if you fail. And what happens is that students, because it's such a clear structure, most of them rise to the occasion. Most of them have a transformative experience and really feel like they've dramatically changed just by they're put into the fire, so to speak, you know? And there's something to be said for that.
I think it is true that there's a balance of the two, and we are in a structure that has grades at the end of the course, and so there is an extrinsic piece built in. I guess I just wanted to emphasize how necessary the intrinsic piece is as well, but point very well taken.
Can I introduce a question from the Twitter back channel? It's similar to the question about motivation, but it's framing it in slightly different language. This person writes, I want to learn about specific tips, I should emphasize, specific tips to shift teaching and learning from grades to wonder. That is, teaching and learning that inspires wonder, deep engagement, risk-taking. That is, what are strategies that can push students in that direction?
So for me, I mean, come to my workshop later. But specific tips are, I mean, I kind of think of them in terms of the three things I laid out, the quest and connection and vulnerability, or taking chances. So in terms of quest, you know, really trying to find a project that's meaningful, and you can have certain tests for whether or not it's meaningful. If students will work on it outside of class or when it's not even for a grade, then you know it's meaningful. If it should be real, a project that you already know how it should turn out, or a problem that you know the answer to is not a real problem. So having that sense of authentic engagement is important. And then a sense of connection is important. So and you can there's lots of different ways to build connection. You know, I'm not a big fan of icebreakers, but I am a fan of bringing people together. So there's a lot of creative ways to do things that bring people together. And they can feel icebreaker-like, but they can also feel like they're full of purpose. And so think about what those things might be. And then you do have to create a space where they can fail. Even if you're still going to have grades, you can still have iterations, you can have feedback, you can have all kinds of ways that people can try and know that you're going to be supportive of them when they fail.
I think also something you said earlier is about your role as a professor is to inspire and just lay out these paradoxes and, you know, these interesting questions, much more so than about, you know, conveying information that is just being poured passively into their heads. If you can inspire them to think and ask questions and seek out the answers, then you've done your job.
Okay. I teach a intro programming course. And what's been interesting to me to observe, and this gets back to the teaching people how to learn or study skills, is that the course starts off very gently. It's aimed at non-techies. And at first, just learning the mechanics and having assignments, it's really clear what you need to do, what I said in class or what the book says tells you how to do it. And then you get to those first assignments where it's like, okay, you have the Lego bricks, you know how to snap them together, but there's no step-by-step instructions, and here's a picture of what you're supposed to create. And what I notice is that some people, for whatever reason, sometimes it's because they're just really into it or that's how their mind works. That idea that they have to do something they've never seen before with tools they have works. And others hit a wall. And I've been trying to figure out how to help those others get past that wall where they feel like it's something they can figure out the new thing. So I tried things like, having decks of cards and handing them out to groups and giving them a challenge around the cards. And what I discovered was a group with someone who gets it, they would help the others and they'd have this great experience. And then another group would assure me that they were making progress and then would quietly not get there. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you help people get past that to where they're teaching themselves how to solve problems they've never solved before.
That's something that I'm going to try to talk about this afternoon in the session on reasoning. I don't know that we'll get all the way there, but hopefully with some feedback, some discussion. But yeah, I don't have a ready answer.
I was hoping you did.
Yeah. Remember, I spend most of my time in the lab,
Yeah,
so.
but I think there's really, I mean, this gets at a question that I have that's really for you as well, and that is like, like in that situation, is it possible that there's nothing that he can do at that moment, and that person just has to have developed in some way, or needs, like maybe there's some actual like growth that hasn't happened yet that's blocking it?
I think that's right, and it's a matter of practicing, practicing integrating information and just breaking down the barriers, because if people feel anxiety around the uncertainty, about the unknown of having to find their own way to integrate the material, maybe this first step is to instill in them this sense that, this is something they got to practice. They have critical thinking skills that they need to work on. And then finding activities and finding other students who can help them get past that is probably the best way.
And then again, I know this is a hard question, but as these students who are just not there yet are struggling, and it's so definitive because it's like in a programming situation where I'm thinking of like, I mess around on that web page that has like Eulers. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's like a series of programming challenges and they sort of level up. And I've been trying to teach myself programming and leveling up as I go. And it's so definitive when you don't get it, right? So it's not like, but you have this great skill. It's like, no, I just can't do this. Then there's this problem of like, how do you maintain that growth mindset in that situation where it seems so hopeless?
Yeah, just this idea that you're not there yet. You're really going to have to work on this because you're uncomfortable with uncertainty right now. You did fine when it was a matter of memorizing all this stuff, but now you got to find a way to get beyond that.
Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued with your lunchtime discussions, and I just wonder how you get the conversations to get to those deep levels.
It's surprisingly easy. I'm not sure why. It could be because when I teach, I'm very like forthcoming about my own life in some ways, and so maybe there's part of that. There's always like a hook in, but sometimes there's also a really great list of questions in the back of Women's Ways of Knowing, which is the interview protocol that they used, and a lot of those questions are very quick entries into a deep conversation. There's also another list of questions that a student brought to me, and he had found it as on a website. It was like 36 questions to make anybody fall in love with you. and that actually works pretty well too.
Hi, thanks for the talks today. First, a comment, I think, quickly on the conversation that George had raised about how do you get people to grasp something that seems ungraspable when they're trying to solve. There was a professor that I had over at MIT who used to call it sync time, and it was in a discipline in analytics that I found really, really challenging. And it was very comforting to me on the student side when he said, sometimes there's, and this is probably a very non-technical way of describing what you were describing on sort of the degrees of the functioning of the brain, but just sync time. Sometimes your brain needs a longer period of time in which to allow this information to sink in, or to allow that skill set of quantitative analytics and reasoning to sink in before it will click. But that confidence piece of, I have confidence that you will all get there.
Yes.
Right? It's about that level of effort in getting there, which I found really reassuring, particularly in his class, because it was daunting. I think that the piece that you added in at the very end, Mike, about, this is sort of the evaluations that I give, and I share them to all students. This is something that I've been wrestling with, which is there are exemplary examples throughout the course of somebody that's really just added huge value to a classroom blog, to really made a very deep personal investment in the topic that is being covered at that moment in time. And I've struggled with how to recognize, share, or highlight that in the context of a larger class, right? So both with the concern of I don't want to embarrass the person who made a deep personal investment in something and point out that they've had a transformative experience, but, and also because just in the sequence of the class, usually I've looked at it and analyzed it a week after it's already been submitted, and we've sort of moved on. And so I'm curious about how you can highlight those investments that are being made by the students and your recognition of that.
Mm-hmm. So for me, what I worry about is that might lead students towards performance goals, comparison of their performance with others. It sounds like the way Mike does it is very different. It's a small group. They've all worked together on a big project, and it doesn't sound like you're saying, Jerry did super well, Jane did not. But yeah, so highlighting the accomplishments of an individual is not the way that I personally go, because I'm focusing on mastery.
So in that small class, everybody knows who that person was. They all know who stepped out and did this amazing thing. So I'll read just real quick something. I'll read just a few lines from his. So I point out, I start off by, your mind is quick and agile. Such skills are mysterious to me. I have no access to them. My joke, like these words I'm typing now, are planned days, if not weeks in advance. You're funny because you're willing to take chances the rest of us won't take, and you take them instantly without hesitation, catching us off guard. All of this makes you instantly likable and a natural leader. It goes on here then, but the thing that I said at the end, I think, which is pertinent to this, is it says, leadership may be your gift, but just remember the wisdom of Kay's dad. This is a resident at Meadowlark, and she's a 89-year-old feminist, which is somewhat rare in Kansas. And she says, and what she said holds just as true for you as it does for anybody else. Quote, you are every bit as good as anybody else out there, male or female, and not one bit better.
Let's talk about group projects. A lot of us try to give students that extra space to develop that sense of wonder by working with their peers on a group project. And you can try the totally unstructured, this is the kind of thing I want you to do, versus here's a lot of milestones to make sure everyone's doing something every week. And any insights from you on how to get that sense of wonder going on in a group project, we'd love to hear.
So I won't speak to wonder necessarily, but what I try to do is I give a grade for the student's own contribution to the project, as well as a grade to the overall project, just to keep everybody motivated to help each other. And one way that I've done that is to give to give grades on students' feedback of each other's work. This doesn't get to wonder, but.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, so I've in big classes, you can set up anonymous systems where students can essentially grade each other's contribution on the project. This is for really big projects where you can't possibly know personally how the project went. So especially my classes of 200 and 400, we do stuff like that. I think there are a lot of ways to screw up group projects, and as a teacher in the way that you set it up. And in general, though, if you can set it up in a way that there's a project that everybody cares deeply about, it's all done, right? But that almost never happens. Usually there's people who don't care, or they're too busy, or whatever, and they find a way to freeload. And so that's where you have to counter the freeloader problem with some mechanism. The best mechanism is, of course, just being right there with them and being excited about the project with them and working with them, and then it's pretty straightforward. But any time where there's no actual engagement, then you need a mechanism, and that's where it gets hard. That's a good way to do it. I like the student evaluation piece.
Yeah, for me, the group project, each individual has their own piece. That's something that they've selected, and then they all integrate it together. So that helps to instill wonder if they're picking something that really lights their fire.
And the tricky thing is then creating a space wide enough that they can find something they truly want to do. It's not just a selection among 3 things that you know, it's like something that is core to their passion. And the challenge then becomes like, you got to make sure they're not just doing something they're good at, but challenges them as well. And
or an essay they've handed in for another class.
Yeah. Like you see that a lot. And so somehow you have to, I mean, all this comes back to how do you create the person who wants to grow, who's willing to take those chances, and that's hard.
So it is possible to shift someone's mindset from fixed to growth mindset. Carol Dweck has some work on this, actually.
Mike, I was really intrigued and actually quite moved by what we saw in the video of the students living with the elderly people. But I was also just wondering if you could talk about how you even made that happen. Yeah. I can't imagine, and I'm picturing IRBs and, you know, one of the young people knocks over one of the people in a walker or something. I mean, how did that happen, and what challenges did you face in it? What gave you the idea? I just thought it really made me cry.
Yeah, it was like a coming together of a lot of people who are in very similar situations trying to make old institutions better. So basically, I found my counterpart in the nursing home industry, somebody who's trying to transform nursing homes into something that, you know, it's part of, if you're familiar with like the Eden Alternative, or if you've been looking at these kinds of things, the Pioneer Network, it's a very like sort of progressive, cutting edge kind of vision of what a nursing home could be. And that's what we have just off campus. And there's a woman there that's my age and I just very much see her as my counterpart, and she struggles in the same way that I struggle within higher ed. She struggles within that industry. So what happened was I went and gave a talk up there just as a sort of community service thing. A lot of K-State professors go up and give talks at this place. And just in the discussion that followed, I realized what a vibrant community it was. And by that, I mean there were these fantastic arguments and cliques and like stuff like one woman said, like I was talking in a room like this, and apparently I was looking this way the whole time, and somebody over here says, "Excuse me, can you look at us now and then?" And then this woman over here says, "Oh, forget her, she's always acting up." And that's when I realized, like, oh, this is a village. This is like this is an anthropological experience, and so right after my talk, I started talking to people about this would be amazing to get people up here, and they were just starting to experiment with the idea of intergenerational living, and they thought, perfect. So there were giant hurdles to leap, but we got through them all, and a lot of lucky breaks. The guy who runs our IRB has also done research in the same space, so he really, walked us through all the steps and making sure we could get there and so on. So it was just a lot of pieces falling together that worked out.
Another question from Twitter. What about pre-post testing? Useful for meeting students where they are, for skill development, promoting deep learning resilience?
I think it's a fantastic idea. I keep meaning to implement it in my own classes. And pre-post testing, not in terms of just content, but really skills, the underlying skills.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love doing it. And I mean, the way that I do it is actually very personal in a way. I have students like write their own life story. And then we go through this class, and at the end, I hope they have more insight on who they are. So I have them write their life story again and look back at their own life story. So it's self-assessed, and it's not quite the same thing as a pre-test, post-test. I also do the classic pre-test, post-test kind of stuff. But that one in particular is the students really respond well to.
One thing we've been thinking about doing is pre-test, post-test for an intro programming class, actually, just to see what kind of general skills in reasoning actually emerge over time.
That's great.
So the question I wanted to ask is kind of following up on that a little bit with resilience. I actually posed the Twitter question you just answered, which I appreciate. So I might ask you a follow-up question. What strategies and kind of insight do you have on questions students who are really struggling? So I feel like in my time at BC, I'm encountering more students who are encountering physical, mental illness kinds of struggles, more requests for accommodations, more students who don't seem to be entering with the skills that I kind of anticipate them entering with. So I'm wondering what kind of insight and strategies you have about working with students who are really struggling, working with them on your own, helping them set timetables, making references to institutional resources and that kind of thing.
Those are, I mean, we accept 99% of our students at K-State. So I'm not sure who we're denying, but it's a huge span of students. We also are, over the last 20 years or so, among public universities, have the highest numbers of top scholarships in terms of like Rhodes and all that. So we have these incredible scholars, right down to like people who need a tremendous amount of remediation. And so that's, for us, that's been an institutional problem, and I feel like we've done a really good job at it because of our position and our land grant mission. So we have a lot of resources on our campus, and I don't know if you have the same kind of resources, but in general, there's a certain level that I know I can help with, but there's also a certain level at which I send them to the writing center, or I send them to the math remediation, or whatever it is that they might need. So we have those resources. That's not a great answer, but
yeah, we have some of those resources as well, but not enough. I mean, it's very easy at a big school like Berkeley to just fall through the cracks, and if I'm teaching a large class, there's not much I can do. But the school is invested now in trying to create a new center for the science of learning that would really try to take some of this science to help students who are struggling. So we'll see if we get that off the ground.
I think it's also useful, to go back to the question from the economics professor earlier, and that is, if you happen to have your own work from when you were a first-year student, go back and look at it. Mine is terrible, and and it reminds me to have empathy for these first-year students and where they're at.
I wanted to foreground a little bit something that's been flowing throughout a lot of the discussion, which is the issue of affect or emotion. You just mentioned empathy, and many of the stories are rich with emotional complexity and depth, whether it's the student who's suffering from so much depression and anxiety and trying to hold it together, or I think the clear emotional connection that you're building with students. So I'm wondering if either of you have things to say about either the role of affect or emotion with the way the mind works, and how to what extent you explicitly try to promote or engage emotional intelligence, emotional presence, or awareness per se, versus it's just part of the landscape that you engage through other means as you're explicit about things.
So affect obviously ties in very closely both with stress and with motivation. And if your motivation is to come to class and learn from someone inspiring like Mike, or to come and do a group project with other students, that's probably the most powerful motivation that we have as social creatures, is our peers. And so I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I actually, in my field at least, I find emotional intelligence and all kinds of affect immensely important in terms of getting to insights. So for example, if we're doing field work with the elderly, you really have to know yourself in order to know the person across from you a little bit more deeply, to know what interesting questions to ask. So I find it essential as an anthropologist to actually do a lot of like soul work, so to speak, and understand who you are and how you got there so that you can encounter another person more deeply.
And you're explicit about that with students?
I'm very explicit about it.
And have them develop that too.
And it's hard to be explicit about it, and there's not a lot of stuff out there right now to help you be explicit about it. So in many ways, we're all like in the process of finding the right language. But you know, in anthropology, I teach 6 skills, and there's 6 now. There were, you know, 7 5 weeks ago. It's like evolving all the time. And you know, I'm like moving things around and changing the wording and all that stuff. And the students are okay with that because they know we're exploring this thing. But the 6 things are things like seeing your own seeing, which is knowing your own biases and assumptions, which is, there's a lot of affect involved with that. Seeing their seeing, like empathy and exercising a sense of empathy. Seeing the big picture, which is much more straightforward, understanding historical context and bigger picture stuff. Seeing how little things matter, so an anthropologist wants to be very observant. We look at a person and look at their shoes and the way they tie them and actually try to see that as a symbol of something, right? And then go on to things like the bigger ones are seeing that we make the world, which is to say that all these words and concepts and so on shape how we think, and that we created these concepts, we continually use them, and then we're recreating that framework for seeing the world, but we can get outside of it. And then the last one is seeing not just that we create the world, but how we create the world. So the strategies and negotiations that people from different positions might take as they negotiate these different values and so on that are all implicit in the way that we talk and think and so on. All of that, it requires a lot of diving into your own self and seeing how you see the world, and also getting past your own barriers, which can be emotional and so on. So yeah, we're very explicit about it.
I wonder how we could better reward students for helping other students who are not there yet, especially in a larger group setting where they don't necessarily form such strong bonds.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if that's something we can do.
We do have larger structures facing us, and one of them is that there's lunch waiting for us very soon at noon. What I'm thinking is if I can throw in one more question from the Twitter feed, and then perhaps we can get one more question from the audience after that, if there is one. Question from Twitter, again, dealing with larger structures. We live in a larger structure where there are certain expectations placed on us as faculty. How do we convince the administration regarding not yet grading or got it grading in a world that is oriented toward a 4.0 grade scale?
Yeah. My approach has been that a lot of times people don't actually know what I'm doing in the classroom. And in practice, the not yet grading does not result in everybody getting an A. There's a lot of incompletes, which is probably the most awkward kind of flag. But a lot of students will get to the end of the semester and just be like, you know, I didn't make it, I don't have it in me, I'm not really interested in this anymore, you know, whatever it might be. And they'll just, at that point, I move into contractual. About 3 weeks left in the semester, I move into like a contract grading kind of mode, where I meet with students who are not clearly going to get the A. And we basically say like, okay, you can either do this and get a B, this and get a C, this and get a D, and so on. And it all like comes out, so at the end of the day, there's nothing there that necessarily looks amiss.
There's some research showing that students come into a class already knowing what grade they're aiming for, and their final grade actually does tend to match up pretty well. And it's surprising, but some people do go in, you know, hoping, expecting to get a B or whatever.
One more question, Pat.
I'm an online graduate student from Georgetown, honored to be working with the nursing education department here. I'm wondering if your theories apply to distance education students, and particularly motivation and the social isolation.
I think there's an afternoon session devoted to that. Is that right? Or no? I think someone's going to be talking about that this afternoon.
I have not done it. I have a very good friend and colleague that I worked with in creating his course, Distance Ed, and I think so. And I've also, so in that course, I've actually been the key advisor for a handful of students. And those handful of students are actually war veterans who are 100% disabled and suffer PTSD and can't come to campus and be around people for very long. And I think the way that he's organized that class, which does require quite a bit of social interaction, but mediated through the medium itself, like discussion boards and so on, has actually nurtured those people quite a bit. And I've started to see them on campus, and they're very grateful for that stepping stone, you know. But I think more to your question, I think what's that?
No,
oh, yeah.
go ahead.
I think it's these elements that Sylvia's brought up are critical. So extrinsic motivation, the need for social connection, and so on, those are all critical, whether it's in an online environment or not. And that makes it both, there are affordances and challenges to the online environment.
So there are a number of new online degree programs at Berkeley, and this is something that I've been on a panel reviewing them, and one has been extremely successful. And what differentiates it from the others is that students all come to campus and live on campus for a week. When they start, they get to know each other, and then they go away and they have online discussions where they can all see each other, and that's a very big part of it, is the group interactions, group work. And then at the end of the year, they come back for another week on campus, just living in there, spending a lot of time together. And that social piece seems to be the glue that holds it all together.
Can we offer some thanks to Mike and Silvia? And thanks also to all of you for engaging in this conversation. The conversation continues. Many of us are headed to Lions Hall for lunch, and then we have workshops this afternoon. I do want to put in a plug, though. This day is not the only day when we want to think about excellence in teaching at BC. We in the center are eager to provide programming for faculty that meets you where you are. So if questions or concerns or themes or topics or anything like that, if any of that has come up today, please send me an email or send an email to the Center for Teaching at bc.edu or the Twitter feed, or find ways to get your ideas to us. We're eager to build programming not only out of today's event, but also along other themes as well. Hope to see you all at lunch. Thank you.